Think of the conch in Lord of the Flies, or that spinning top in Inception. Think of the 10 little soldiers in And Then There Were None, or the ring in Lord of the Rings, or the 24-karat gold bracelet in Amy Tan's Joy Luck Club. It's difficult and maybe even impossible to write great fiction without using important objects. Objects are there to expose your character. They are absolutely there to propel your plot along, and they also can embody a lot of emotion. If you already have an important object in your story, this video is going to help you understand that object better, how to employ it in more ways, and perhaps maybe add an object or two. And if you don't have an important object in your book already, these 6 points are going to help you come up with the best possible one. So the very first step to help you work with objects in your novel is number 1, practice the inventory game. What a character carries tells you who they are as a person. For instance, in Flannery O'Connor's Good Country People, there's a guy who's pretending to be a Bible salesman, but his true identity is revealed by what he's carrying. A hollowed out Bible containing a flask of whiskey, a pack of pornographic playing cards, and condoms. So the objects he carries reveal that he is a predator and a con artist. Or look at The Things They Carry by Tim O'Brien. We got one character carrying vitamins, another one carrying a slingshot, another one carrying brandy and M&Ms, and a fourth is carrying his girlfriend's pantyhose. And then of course they're all carrying ghosts of all the friends who have been killed alongside them in the Vietnam War. So here's an exercise for you. What are the 3 things that your character carries? And I don't want any terrible answers like wallet and keys, right? This is boring. I want you to come up with stuff that tells us something about who your character is. And a little bonus here, if you can come up with something that your character never carries that most people do, that also tells us something about them. Like, for instance, Jack Reacher never carries a wallet or a phone. He only carries his toothbrush. And I just want to extend an invitation to apply for BookFox Lab. We are helping a lot of authors succeed in the writing life. Our mentors have guided students to get published with Simon & Schuster, with Hachette, with Random House, with HarperCollins, and a lot more. And if you're self-publishing, authors we've worked with have sold an enormous amount of copies and also won a lot of good independent awards. If you're thinking about investing in your novel and joining BookFox Lab, we start a new cohort in a few weeks, so now is the time to apply. The link is in the description. Please reach out. Another brilliant way to use objects inside your fiction is number 2, add a plot object. The more familiar term to use for plot objects is a MacGuffin. These are objects that direct and drive your entire story, like the Maltese Falcon or that briefcase in Pulp Fiction. Now, I think a writer who uses plot objects really well is Elena Ferrante. She's this anonymous Italian writer. She makes like Thomas Pynchon look like a showboater. That's how reclusive she is. And I think she's a great example of this because in every single one of her books, she has a very central object that guides the entire plot. These objects really aren't special in any way, like they're pretty everyday objects and, pretty feminine objects. But I'd like to just concentrate on one, the bracelet in Lying Life of Adults, because I think it can show us how to use objects in our own novel. So here you can see all the plot points of how this bracelet sort of moves around between characters throughout the whole book. And honestly, you could sketch the whole plot just by following who has the bracelet and where the bracelet is going next. The bracelet is how she figures out her grandfather had a mistress. When the aunt gives her the bracelet, it helps Giovanna feel like she's really loved. And the bracelet also helps her to have sort of a sexual awakening. And so inspired by how Ferrante treats this bracelet in her novel, I've come up with 5 questions that I think you need to ask yourself if you have a central object in your book. One is, how many times does it change hands? Because moving that object around creates all sorts of plot tensions and chances for betrayal and lovely storytelling potential. The second thing to consider is who wants this object. The more people in your novel who want the object, the more it can be central talisman that everyone's fighting over. 3, make sure to ask yourself, how is this object powerful? For Ferrante, the bracelet is mostly emotionally powerful, while in something like the Maltese Falcon, that's mainly for wealth. 4, ask yourself, what does this object symbolize? For the bracelet, it really represents her whole family history. And then number 5, what are the repercussions because of this object? What happens because this object exists? And what do characters do in response to this object? All right, you're really gonna like this next point. It is number 3. try a plot purpose object. So this object isn't going to be the most central object in your story. That was the plot object in the last point. No, this is an object in your book which really just solves one particular obstacle in your book, like in a particular scene or in a certain chapter. Think of the spinning top in Inception. This is an object which is designed to solve one singular problem, to help the user figure out whether this is a dream or reality. Or in The Shawshank Redemption by Stephen King, we have the object of a rock hammer. We see this object and then we forget about it until the end of the story, where we learn that Andy has spent years and years tunneling out of the prison using this little rock chisel, and they find it later like worn down to a nub. Another way to use plot purpose objects in your fiction is to come up with technological objects that solve a certain problem in your storyline. And honestly, this is great world building because it gives the reader the pleasure of seeing, an object that is plausible, like maybe we could come up with this technology in the future. For instance, Ursula Le Guin came up with the Ansible, which allows for faster than light communication and solves all sorts of problems for characters in vastly different parts of the galaxy. Or in Kim Stanley Robinson's The Mars trilogy, we see a space elevator, which allows, things get up into orbit really easily. And all sorts of sci-fi novels use a Dyson sphere, which is basically like a huge giant sphere to contain a sun. Okay, so here is an exercise for you. Your character needs to get through a locked door. And here's the important thing to remember about objects. If they solve all your problems, then that doesn't leave you anywhere to go story-wise. What you need is an object that solves one problem, but also creates a secondary problem. And for a quick example of this, like you come up with a way to get through the door, but the noise attracts guards, right? So now you have another problem to deal with. I really enjoy this next point. It is a lot of fun, and it is number 4, use objects of power. So especially when you're writing fantasy, an object of power can allow your character to have access to some sort of magical component of your world. And for this example, let's look at The Subtle Knife by Philip Pullman. He actually uses a special object in every single book in his Dark Materials series, but we're focusing on book number 2, which is something he calls a subtle knife. And based on how Pullman uses the knife in his novel, I'm going to take you through a checklist of 7 guidelines that should help you figure out what your object can do in your book. First, think about the object's powers. For instance, the subtle knife has the ability to cut a window between parallel universes. Second, think about the rules of this object. The subtle knife requires this open-mindedness before you can use it. You have to let go of preconceived notions. The third point is the one that most writers forget, and it's probably the most important one in this list. You need to come up with limitations for your object. So for the subtle knife, if you attempt to use this knife while thinking of a loved one, the knife will shatter. Fourth, you might want to come up with an ingenious way that your characters win this object. For instance, they have to go on a whole quest and travel to a new place and battle someone to win this knife. The fifth step is to come up with downsides for your object. If you use the knife too often, the very fabric of the world will collapse. That's a downside. That's a bad thing. A sixth thing to consider for your object is a consequence. Because of how they use the knife, in the end, the two main characters, they have to separate and return to their own worlds to solve the problem of what this magical object has created. And lastly, number 7, I want you to think about the consequences of your object. In the end, does this object need to be destroyed or lost in some way? Like Lord of the Rings, in this case, Will has to destroy this knife. Hey, if you're enjoying this video, now is the time to crush that subscribe button or smash that like button. Do it. Do it now. Your novel will thank you. And I thank you as well. This next way to use objects is through memory, and it is number 5. Treat objects as memory vessels. So there's a whole long list of objects that create this enormous emotional weight in the character. I mean, the classic example here is Proust's Madeleine. He eats it, and the smells and the taste reminds him of all these memories of childhood. But we're going to look at George Orwell's 1984, specifically at Winston's paperweight. So the paperweight reminds him of an age before this totalitarian government came to power, of a simpler time, of a better time. And he really takes a lot of time to describe this paperweight. I mean, look at the detailed descriptions here. But that's because for him, it reminds him of a past where there was freedom. So this isn't just a paperweight, right? It's a symbol of memory. It's a symbol of the past. And of course, because the party can't bear to have a reminder of the past, they end up, destroying this paperweight. So here's a little writing exercise for you. Create an object for your character that sparks a memory. First, first, you want to describe the object carefully, just like Orwell. And then second, show us the memory that this character experiences because of the object. Now, little bonus tip here. Ideally, you want to create some sort of friction between what's happening in this present moment, whether that be good or bad, and what's happening in the memory, right? So if you're in a really terrible situation in the present moment, then the memory should be a really happy one. However, if you're in a really happy moment, then the memory that this creates should actually be a really sad one. Okay, our last point is actually our most important one. So it is number 6, objects that embody emotion. So Annie Proulx wrote a short story called Brokeback Mountain, which was made into a very famous film. That might be where a lot of you know it from. But there's very important objects in this novel, specifically the 2 shirts that hang in the wardrobe. So one of the characters sees these 2 shirts sort of nuzzling up in the closet, and it just reminds him of the love he had with his friend. Another example might be Outlander. She wears 2 wedding rings, a silver ring and a gold ring, and each one is for a different husband. One is her former husband, who unfortunately passed, and one is for her current husband. Now, the objects in both of those examples are doing so much work in the storyline, right? You would have to spend dozens of pages sort of explaining the emotion, but if you just let an object carry that emotional weight, it's so much more powerful. And here is one final exercise for you, just to practice making sure that you can take an object and associate it with an emotion for your character. What I want you to do is to write a story, maybe just a page-long story, about a pair of socks. Now, you wouldn't normally think that socks are emotional in any way, right? I don't know. I'm not emotional towards my socks. Maybe you are, probably not. But your goal is to take these 2 socks and make the reader weep by the end of the story. I think it's really important to use a neutral object like a pair of socks, because then you really have to inject this neutral object with a lot of emotions to get the reader to feel something by the end of the story. Lastly, if your goal is to self-publish or traditionally publish a good book, BookFox Lab can definitely help you with that. Check out the link in the description below. We would love to work with you. And for everybody else, you need to take an object and make sure it is very powerful and present in your storyline. It really will improve your book as a whole. Happy writing.